So I talk a lot about vows and narratives and how they impact our lives. So we want you to think about it this way. When we all come into this world, we're kind of a blank slate. I mean, for the most part, we're a blank slate. And what ends up happening is, I'm going to give you an analogy that this is kind of like. It's like when you put your footprint in the sand and it goes into the sand, it makes an imprint. Okay? When it makes that imprint, unless someone drives over it, someone puts more sand over it, or the water washes over it, that footprint stays. Well, that's what happens in our brain when we have traumas, when we have fracturing. It stays there like a footprint on the beach. And unless we actively do something, like have a tide come in to wash it away, it's going to stay like a footprint. Now, in the book that I'm writing on, dark personalities, fracturing vows, narratives, all that stuff in belonging language, I do talk about the brain. I talk about neuroscience and what neuroscience says about dark personalities. I think that's super important. And I break down the brain. I break down the frontal lobe, where everything works in the brain, so people can be more educated about this. Okay, so I'm going to continue. I've talked, I think, a little bit about this. When you do not take care of your vows, you don't take care of those footprints in the sand, and you have multiple footprints. It's like in your brain, you have multiple footprints. As you get older, you will amplify your personality, your behaviors around your narratives, and your belonging language will amplify. This is why it's so important to have checks and balances around people, and to keep checks and balances around people, and to make sure we have those. No matter who you are, we have to have them, and they have to be equal. It does not, and what I'm saying is, I don't care what gender, what race, what your sexual orientation is, what your age is, it needs to be where we are creating a place of equity. You can't say with one person, I don't like the way you did that, and the other person does it, and it's like, it's okay. These things are not, this is what ends up happening, because then what you're doing is you are saying the footprint that's in that person's brain doesn't need to have the water wash it over. And as they get older, they will get worse. Because what happens to a lot of people is then some people start having mini strokes. And I've seen people who have had mini strokes. They either get their behavior and their personality is either nicer or they're meaner. This is why you have to, with people who are not doing their own checks and balances, who are not using water to wash away those misperceptions in their lives, aren't working with people actively, whether it's their friends, their partners, aren't putting those own checks and balances in their life, we have to as a society. I don't want to have another Charles Manson type of situation. I don't. He did not have some checks and balances that were in place. He didn't have things that could have helped him. So, there's a story recently on this teacher that was 31. Her name was Brittany Forberry or something like that. And people were ignoring certain things about her behavior, and she ended up graping a bunch of junior hires, and I think even some younger boys, and sending them pictures of herself that were inappropriate because the people in there were not watching the warning signs and putting proper checks and balances in. Oh, women don't do that. That's a narrative. It's the men who do that. But people will always show who they are and what they're about. Their words will show, and even people were saying there were signs. There were tons of signs being shown. People were not listening to the signs. So what I highly encourage people to do, besides get my book, of course, when it comes out, I highly suggest people work on those things. Put some checks and balances in your own life. Have people around you help you with checks and balances. I do. In fact, I was talking with someone today about a check and balance I did with myself when I was watching something, and I even talked about it on here, on how I had to check myself and my narratives around something. And when you do this, it is so impactful because it changes your life. And you don't go down a path of, and I want to make this very clear, this isn't a path of I'm going to beat myself up. This isn't a path of being more critical with yourself. This isn't a path of self-hatred. This is a path of saying, I can't believe this happened. I'm curious. Okay, so where did this come from? Or I'm curious, maybe I need to address this and re-look at something. That's all that is. Because when you learn how to readdress it and re-look at something and see it from another perspective, that's what that's about. It has nothing to do with you personally. It has to do with just shifting a couple of things. So that's what that's about. And I want to make that very clear. This is not about saying, oh my gosh, I'm so bad because I believe this. No, it's about saying, that's interesting. I wonder where that came from, or I wonder why I believe that. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit and, work with it. If you unpack your clothes from a trip and you find you left something in that suitcase, you're not going to be mad at yourself or mad at the suitcase because you left something in it. So I just want to dive in this a little bit deeper. And this is, I get excited about this stuff. I know that sounds kind of weird and nerdy, but this is part of the stuff I do around belonging. This impacts how we belong. This impacts how people see us. This impacts how people react or respond to us. This impacts how approachable we are. And so, on that note, I'll see you next time. Bye for now.